Hello, this is Robert Hux with the Committee for the Republic of Canada. I'm on the line here with Ramtanu Maitra, who is the EIR Bureau Chief in New Delhi. Ramtanu has worked with Lyndon and Helga LaRouche for many years. Welcome to our conference, Tanu.
Thank you, Robert.
So there has been a dramatic change occurring around the world with the emergence of a new, just world economic order associated with the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. What do you have to say about this in terms of what this signifies?
Well, I think that this is a natural evolution of things, which in fact should have happened before. The failure of the old international economic order, steered by the transatlantic nations, has created a situation in which there was absolutely no incentive or cash available for the developing nations to develop. In the meantime, the population is going up. The requirements are higher. The BRICS is really the name was coined by a Goldman Sachs fellow. His name is Jim O'Neill, I think, and but it is it is consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now, what is happening already before is that in the Eurasian landmass, the Chinese were already developing since 1980s and had reached a point in which, in order to continue with their growth, they wanted to interlink Asia and Europe through what they call the New Silk Road. Now they have added an additional item to that, which is the Maritime Silk Road, which is by sea going to Africa, Ibero-America, North America, etc. But they had already started doing this thing. Now only there are a couple of things happened. First, to begin with, is that particularly in Brazil, with Dilma Rousseff, South Africa, Zuma, in Russia, Putin, in India, Modi, and in China, Xi Jinping, these all five seem to be pretty dynamic by nature. They wanted to go ahead and develop the area, and they have realized that the old international economic order is completely bankrupt. It has been looted by the financial districts and the bankers and speculators. So, I would say that although the BRICS is around for a few years, it was this July at Fortaleza in Brazil, then when these five heads of state, of which Modi was the brand new one, and Xi Jinping was pretty new too, when they came together, and Putin came to realize from the kind of operations that are being carried out by the Western nations to undermine and even to break up Russia through Georgia, to Ukraine, to various operations inside Russia, in Chechnya, Dagestan, Ossetia, etc. Putin has came to realize that it will be, from the security point of view, from every other point of view, aligning with China, India were practically congruent if you consider Central Asia. It will be a strategy which will allow him to develop Russia and stabilize Russia's borders. So this happened in July, in mid-July, and in where they started this new development bank and the contingency reserve arrangement, CRA. And then later, in early November, China announced, along with 20 other Asian countries, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So all these things basically, well, Asian Infrastructure Invest Bank is specifically for Asia's development, infrastructure development in Asia. The New Development Bank, that is of BRICS, and CRA is anybody who wants to have an access to will get an access. That is basically what has been said. These banks have not been set up as yet. They will be set up in 2015. But the formulation is now the secretariat of this group working out various formulations, and what is expected is that this development bank will be giving out money for your developmental purposes, and these will not attach the strings that World Bank, IMF came to become a sort of conditionality-based loans and things like that, which never allowed the developing countries to secure enough loan in order to develop their country. So there's an enormous requirement for this. And these 5 leaders came together and said that it is time now to make a fresh effort to develop the world. And there was no exclusion policy. Everybody is allowed to come in. West is invited to come in, and all that. Importantly, that these 5 countries also considered that the security and development should go hand in hand together, and of course, infrastructure development is very important. But let me tell you something else, that long before this Jim O'Neill fellow came out with his BRICS name, in 95, I'm sorry, Mr. LaRouche has mentioned to the Indian leaders, he visited them subsequently a number of times, told the Indian leaders that it is time to look at Russia, India, China as the engine for growth. Now, that was still, the timing was, that is when the thinking started, but at that point in time, Russia was still going through the dismantling of the Soviet Union, and what followed after that was complete looting of Russia by these speculators within Russia, the oligarchs and the various other forces. Russia was very weak. India was not yet started to grow in a rapid pace. China was growing, but China's financial capabilities or reserves were not sufficient enough at that point in time to this thing to flow. I was in 1999. There was an international conference in which the Russians were there, the Chinese were there, and of course the Indians were there. And with the help of Russian Academy of Science, one of their heads, Rybakov, and then from China, there's Chinese institute called CICIR, one of their leading scholars, Margiali, and Indian International Schools head at the time, dean of that, who was also heading the conference, Kaushik, Devendra Kaushik. I formed a triangular association, China, India, and Russia. And I was the convener. In 1999, this happened. The conference was organized, was sponsored by Indian Prime Minister Vajpayee. He was aware of this development. We got it registered in India. I think it got registered in Russia, but no, the Chinese, Professor Margiali told me that it is very difficult to register anything in China which is foreign based, so it didn't get registered. But subsequently, I held a press conference in Delhi, New Delhi, and a lot of people came, including the Russian embassy press, and a number of them came. But they were sort of looking at me with, sort of curious eyes, what are you talking about? Russia and China are still at loggerheads. India, China is completely, two different directions, and they think in two different ways. How do you think this thing will formulate, this thing will work out? Well, my answer is that it is not whether I am pushing them to form this union. This is an obvious thing that they have to adapt, simply because the old monetary international economic order is bankrupt. The leaders of those monetary order are now involved entirely on looting in the form of speculations and phony money. All of us will soon find out that there is no other alternative but to do it. And the question was, the problem was, I would say, that during this period of time, since from 1999 to 2014, a number of things happened. One is that U.S. further became further weaker, and they got involved in many wars, and which the credibility further went down. And 2007 collapse came, crash, from which they have never recovered. Nobody has recovered, and those things happened. And then China became a very major source of money because it has a foreign reserves of about $3.9 trillion. India is still in a $360 billion of reserve. Russia has about $400+ billion of reserves. Now after this thing, that I think the Chinese initiative and Russia and India's realization with the new leadership that it is the time to do this. So I think that it is a very fortunate time now, and it is a very opportune time for the world to develop. All it needs is that these three fellows, or even the Brazilians or the South Africans by themselves, cannot develop. If we just consider Brazil represents only one state in a huge Ibero-America, which needs enormous amount of development. Africa, of course, all of us know, it is completely devastated over the years by the colonial powers. With these five, and then there are many in Asia. I think that Japan, South Korea will be definitely coming in. Indonesia, all will be pitching into all this stuff. If West comes in with Europe and United States and Canada, then there is a shot that the next generation after, our generation is almost gone. Two generations later, you can see, about 30 years later, you can see a world which is the sort of the world that we, with Mr. LaRouche and us, were always hoping for and praying for and working for. So this is an opportunity that exists today. Well, by 2007, China had already developed to a point, had developed its reserves and all that to a point in which, and manufacturing capabilities, that they were not an immediate threat. And they didn't create the kind of phony money that was created here, which is the basic cause, and looting of the real money and creation of phony money, which is the real cause of the collapse. But China was looking beyond protecting itself from collapse. China saw that now is the time, and there will be others. Now is the time to go ahead and develop the region around it, so that China can bring in various types of various reserves and things like that, and can continue to grow. And because China still needs to grow, that in 2007 or 8, they were very clear-headed that we need to grow, and we can do it. We can do it provided we follow the basic principle that the fundamental of economic growth, nothing else. can protect an economy. So that realization of theirs, it was also the realization in Japan in the post-World War II period. The Japanese also had the same understanding. They have moved away from that. But this realization, I think, is the seed which eventually led to what you see today as BRICS.
So the essential change required in the United States, Europe, and Canada would begin with the Glass-Steagall, which would simply eliminate all of these speculative debts that have no value, so that we could actually participate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what Franklin Roosevelt did, and rebuilt the United States into a magnificent power over the next 20 years, 20, 25 years. Because I'll tell you something which most of the Americans do not talk about, but between 1955 and say 1978, if you take these 23 years and look at the United States, you will see some fascinating stuff, and you would wonder where this came from. It came from Roosevelt's policy of this Glass-Steagall. In these 20 years, the United States built about 95 nuclear power plants. Since then, they have built 7. In the next 40 years, I'm talking about, they built the entire highway system, Eisenhower's period. During that period, within 10 or 12 years, starting from 55 to 67, and then from almost from scratch, the moon program started, the space program started, and they landed people on the moon by 1969. If you look at that period, this all is the fruit of the tree which is built on, which was based on infrastructure. Infrastructure was magnificent at that point in time. But they moved away from there, and now everything has collapsed. Now it is time for West to rebuild all these things. And here is, in 1950s or 1960s, you didn't have Russia, you didn't have China, you didn't have India, who could contribute in a significant way. But now they can contribute in a significant way. So you take the part of the world and do your development, and the other part of the world's development, which is Russia, India, China, since they're contiguous, they will do the Asia and Eurasia, Central Asia, all the way to Middle East. So this is a wonderful opportunity as far as I can see, provided we and everybody else could move the Western leaders to see the light. That is the whole problem.
So what kind of time frame are we talking about here, Tano? Is this something that would play out over 3 to 5 years, or are we talking a much longer generational time frame in terms of growth?
Things like this, and it's very difficult to forecast how long would it take, because what is important in all this is the momentum. But if you really go gung-ho and do it, and the full focus and full realization that this is what is to be done in order to build a better future for a better future, then there you have it can be cut down to say 25 to 30 years. But between this today and this 25 years that I'm talking about, a whole lot things will develop, and millions and millions of people, if not billions, will get benefit out of it. In order to do the sort of a development without disparity, it will take 25 to 30 years minimum. But within 4 or 5 years, you will see that benefits are coming into millions and millions of people. So there is really no end point. There's always a start point. It can go on. The development can continue even more.
Yeah.
One of the things that Lyndon LaRouche has pointed to is that a couple of years ago, when there was an anniversary of the birth of Franklin Roosevelt, this was something that was celebrated much more in Russia than it was in the United States, which indicates, I guess, that they're looking at the physical economy that's been abandoned in the United States and Europe. Would you say that there has been a similar, much greater appreciation of the ideas of Franklin Roosevelt in India and China over this recent period?
Not in a you go by name, it is not probably so, but they do recognize that the U.S.'s infrastructure development, the successes that they met during the end 40s to end 60s. These are the examples that they must follow. This is what is needed. You have to develop your infrastructure because Asia, in particular, was the worst victim of colonization. Not the worst. I should not say that. Africa was the worst, but Asia was a major victim of colonization by the European countries. And during this colonization period, they really didn't do any infrastructure because their fear always was, if infrastructure means development, development means they will be pushing us out of the colonies. So they kept the infrastructure to the minimum so that the military movement and all this thing can be done, and the minimal amount of infrastructure in order to bring back some looting of some minerals and reserves and all that kind of stuff. But it was virtually every country was kept separate. There is no integration of, say, if you look at the Southeast Asian nations, we start with Myanmar, then south of Myanmar is Thailand, south of Thailand is Malaysia, and then east of Thailand is Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, but you wouldn't find a single railroad that connects all the way from one to another, but each one was kept as a separate entity by one colonial power or the other. Same thing in India, but and there is no connection between India and Afghanistan ever existed. No connection between Afghanistan to all the way to Kazakhstan, Central Asia, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Russia didn't exist. So the thing is, the Soviets did a lot of stuff in the Central Asian area, in this infrastructure area. But the understanding that infrastructure is the key for economic development, that they understood from, I would say, it goes back to Peshine, Smith, Henry Carey. Those are the great economists of the United States who, of course, was the source for Lincoln and source for Roosevelt as well. So if you talk to these people, they will say that the American tradition of developing infrastructure is what we realize is what is necessary for Asia and Eurasia as well. So Roosevelt, not by name, but anybody and everybody will tell you that Roosevelt was a great leader.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Could you describe some of the physical projects that are now underway in, for example, India, China, and Russia? I know that you have said before that that no nation in the world has actually approached the question of energy production from the standpoint of making nuclear power the mainstay of the economy. Is that something that's able to perhaps be dealt with under this new arrangement that's now emerging among collaboration of nations?
Well, I don't see at this point in time that any country has committed itself to make nuclear power as their only source of electricity generation. But then I must qualify that with a statement that with 400 million people in India are without electricity. I think about 100 million in China as well. Now, when you are sitting in the chair of the leader and you are looking at your country's people, and if you have a conscience, your first objective will be how quickly can I provide them with electricity. Now, when you are caught in that trap, or you can call it a trap, or this is the philosophy, then you will seek what is available, what is the easiest and most available thing we have. One is, of course, hydropower. Another is coal-fired plants. Now, coal is, is now 2 centuries old source of power, and there are plenty companies exist who can produce many boilers, many when they burn the coal and all that, furnaces and all that. So it is always easily available, and coal is easily available, and coal is not considered as it is a strategic material, but not the way uranium is. Uranium is considered a dangerous material because of its capability, to destroy a large population when it's used wrongfully. But so the choice comes, and that China at this point in time is going big, has gone very big with the coal as its power generation source. There was a period, I think about a couple of years back, when they were almost on an average. They're installing 500 megawatt coal-fired plants every week. So 52 of those a year. So the Indians and the Chinese and everybody else who doesn't have, and nobody has, enormous amount of capability to develop nuclear reactors, they will go for coal. But they also must realize, and I think there is a bit of realization coming in, that coal is not a sustainable source of energy, because coal will run out of coal, and it has this very dangerous, after effects, like it pollutes, it creates this fly ash, which is highly toxic, and it's a huge amount that comes out as fly ash, and it destroys the land, destroys the water. So sooner or later, you have to get rid of coal. That realization is there. But the option, of course, if you want to go nuclear, and they want to go nuclear, that you have to develop a huge infrastructure to develop nuclear power at a level in which you will be able to meet the demands, annual growth of electricity demand. You will be able to meet it. So at this point in time, my research found that the world can produce only 30 reactors. Now 30 reactors, I'm averaging out, is about 30,000 megawatt. Now China itself adds 30,000 megawatt a year. So there is enormous shortfall in reactor manufacturing, because what has been done by this environmentalist movement, the greenies and all that, by putting by targeting nuclear as their source for anti-development program, by calling nuclear as a dangerous. So everybody has moved out of nuclear reactor manufacturing. So only 30 reactors can be manufactured. My calculation at this point in time is that the world must produce about 200 to 250 reactors a year. And such a huge number, if you consider that to be a huge number, can only be done by the large nations. In other small nations, you cannot expect that they will be able to gear up their engineering and manufacturing and material sectors in such a way, and manpower, in such a way that they will be able to produce a significant number of reactors. So India, China, Russia, US, and Brazil, South Africa, countries like Canada, countries like that who already have a pretty developed engineering capabilities and manufacturing capabilities and manpower as well, they should now move towards manufacturing 30 by 30 or 40 all by themselves. When I see that, then I will say, okay, now these countries have made the commitment that they will have nuclear power as the only source of electricity generation, because there will be nothing else available other than nuclear fission now. Later, of course, even better is the nuclear fusion when it comes into existence. Its only requirement is hydrogen. Nuclear fission requirement is a number of things, but all these can be recycled and can be reused. So in a sense, that it is a completely renewable energy source. But this has not as yet taken place. And as I said, I qualify this by saying that the exigency of matters, because you have to provide electricity to people. So you should look for what is the thing that I have in hand, which I can use to generate electricity. And coal comes in as a handy item. And hydro, yes, but hydro has its limitation, limitations, because only where there is a fast-flowing river, you will get that. Otherwise, but where coal you can put up in almost anywhere you want.
What would you say to Canadians in terms of what is required to get our government to move towards an alliance with the BRICS nations, with an appreciation of what this would mean for Canada? China and also Russia have proposed the Bering Strait Tunnel. China is doing some amazing things right now, moving water from the southern parts of China into the arid northern parts of China. That United States and Canada could benefit by collaborating with them on. So what would you say to Canadians about what this BRICS alliance would pose for them?
I would say for Canada, the most important thing to do is to go ahead and push the United States to go with the NAWAPA project. That water project will allow the United States to regenerate itself and become the breadbasket of the world. I mean, there are a number of places which can be breadbaskets provided adequate input is given in the form of power, water, seeds, etc., etc. The second thing that Canada has an enormous capability is that Canada can do the heavy water reactors. Canada is the pioneer in all that. And they have now the capability to manufacture about 1,000 megawatt capacity. And the only other countries who are now using heavy water reactor is really only one country which uses heavy water reactor is India. But India has not scaled it up beyond 500 megawatt. China has gotten into heavy water reactor system, but they're still at a very nascent stage. And I think South Korea is also looking at heavy water reactors. The problem with the heavy water reactors not problem, but many countries do not want to do it because heavy water by itself is another industrial sector. So you have to manufacture heavy water. You cannot get heavy water from outside. A lot of countries do not want to get into that, but the bigger countries see that it is no big deal for them to manufacture heavy water. If it is a source for power generation, then it is a simple little task to perform. So India is going to go very big on the heavy water reactors. Canada, of course, can contribute in a very, very significant way by not only producing itself a large number of these large capacity heavy water reactors and then exporting them to India, China, and whoever else who has the heavy water manufacturing capability, but also they can contribute in helping India, China, in particular, to make large capacity heavy water reactors. That's one part of it. The second part of it, this world needs enormous amount of desalination. Desalination in coastal areas would solve enormous amount of problems that many of these large countries face because of lack of fresh water. Their water, they have to divert water from agriculture to meet the commercial and domestic demands in coastal areas. Instead of that, desalination can take over all these responsibilities. But for desalination, you don't need a huge reactor, so you need small reactors. You can put them in clusters. You can make 50 megawatt reactors and put over a period of time 8 or 10 or 12 or 20 of them together as the population grows, as the demand increases, as activities increase. You do that. Now, nobody is going to make these 50 or 75 megawatt reactors because the mood in India and China that I see is to meet large-scale electricity and to meet the demand of large-scale electricity consumption. So they will go for larger reactors. And in the meantime, the desalination process, which is as important as power generation process almost, will remain neglected. Now here, Canada can play a very significant role by creating an assembly line of 75 megawatt or 50 megawatt or even 100 megawatt heavy water reactors, which doesn't need too much of heavy water, and then roll them by like, you make cars. You can make many of them, and they will, as far as I'm concerned, between India, Pakistan, China, they will need about anything between 500 to 1,000 of these reactors for their desalination purposes. They're long coastal lines. I think this is a task that Canada is perfectly capable of doing. They have all the technologies, and they can earn a good money out of this as well, and be happy that they have performed a very noble task.
Okay, I think that's a good picture for what Canadians have to do. So
Yeah.
thank you for your time, Tanu.
Thank you, Robert. Madhu Steph, South Africa, Zuma, in Russia, Putin, in India, Modi, and in China, Xi Jinping. These all five seem to be pretty dynamic by nature. They wanted to go ahead and develop the area, and they have realized that the old international economic order is completely bankrupt. It has been looted by the financial districts and the bankers and speculators. So, I would say that although the BRICS is around for a few years, it was this July at Fortaleza in Brazil, then when these five heads of state, of which Modi was the brand new one. Now, what is happening already before is that in the Eurasian landmass, the Chinese were already developing since 1980s and had reached a point in which, in order to continue with their growth, they wanted to interlink Asia and Europe through what they call the New Silk Road. Now they have added an additional item to that, which is the Maritime Silk Road, which is by sea going to Africa, Ibero-America, North America, etc. But they had already started doing this thing. Now only there are a couple of things happened. First, to begin with, is that particularly in Brazil, and Xi Jinping was pretty new too, when they came together, and Putin came to realize from the kind of operations that are being carried out by the Western nations to undermine and even to break up Russia through Georgia, to Ukraine, to various operations inside Russia, in Chechnya, Dagestan, Ossetia, etc. Putin has came to realize that it will be, from the security point of view, from every other point of view, aligning with China, India were practically congruent if you consider Central Asia. It will be a strategy which will allow him to develop of the old international economic order, steered by the transatlantic nations, has created a situation in which there was absolutely no incentive or cash available for the developing nations to develop. In the meantime, the population is going up. The requirements are higher. The BRICS is really the name was coined by a Goldman Sachs fellow. His name is Jim O'Neill, I think, and but it is consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Hello, this is Robert Hux with the Committee for the Republic of Canada. I'm on the line here with Ramtanu Maitra, who is the EIR Bureau Chief in New Delhi. Ramtanu has worked with Lyndon and Helga LaRouche for many years. Welcome to our conference, Tanu.
Thank you, Robert.
So there has been a dramatic change occurring around the world with the emergence of a new just world economic order associated with the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. What do you have to say about this in terms of what this signifies?
Well, I think that this is a natural evolution of things, which in fact should have happened before. The failure